Welcome back to the early read. And obviously, if you're listening to this, you know it is March. So you know it's March Madness, all the corny tweets you could ever imagine. And before we get to what is deemed March Madness, we have Conference Tournament Week, which I think is the one of the more underrated weeks on the sports calendar, I think, especially early on, where you get those day games, a lot of conference tournament familiarity. And to do that, especially in the mid-major ranks, I want to bring on someone who is as in the weeds in college basketball as I have seen coming through, especially on the sports betting side of things. And that's, of course, Matthew Winnick at Matthew Winnick on Twitter. He's a basketball editor for The Score. I'm not sure if he's doing it during conference tournament, so I don't want to put the onus on him, but every day or 5 days a week, he's been doing Google Sheets, basically previewing every single game on the slate and giving some sort of insight, betting deliverable or something of that sort. It's been super helpful for someone like myself who, focus on college football early in the season and needs to get caught up to speed. Sometimes I go over to his Google Sheet and, look for a few tips. But Matt, thanks for coming on, man. How's it going?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's definitely my favorite time of the year. I mean, nothing will ever top the first game on the Thursday of March Madness. The ball is tipped. There's like four games that start almost immediately, but probably outside of that first day, I'd say that the first week for 2 weeks of conference tournament season is my favorite time of college basketball. So I'm super excited yesterday, I guess it kind of started, but barely, like a small little taste. So I think we're really going to start to get into the thick of things this week. I'm thrilled.
Yeah, so we're gonna go through a handful of mid-major ones. We'll make sure we'll talk like futures, sort of matchups we're looking for, maybe catch the listeners up on a few of the mid-major teams that could be in the tournament, the big tournament that is that you need to keep your eye on. But before that, we gotta start, of course, with my guy, not my guy. Been a bit of a cooler the last like 2 weeks in college hoops, so I had to kind of dig in for my guy, someone who was kind to me. A lot of guys not so kind to me, but Michi Johnson for South Carolina was on them against Texas A&M, was on them against Florida. So Michi Johnson, 25 and 22 over the last two, had what was the game winner against Florida. South Carolina, I have a feeling I will be against them early in the tournament when they are a 6 seed and they get a probably overqualified 11, the team that comes out of Dayton, and they're like a pick, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, the 6'11" is a pick on up." Yeah, probably for a good reason. But that being said, South Carolina, I've been impressed. Of course, Michi Johnson's been awesome. So my guy of the week, Michi Johnson. Matt, thoughts on South Carolina? Your own my guy. Any takeaways there?
Yeah, South Carolina, I think it's going to depend on the draw in the tournament. They're going to be probably the most popular upset pick just because the analytic sites don't like them. And I can kind of see why. I believe the one result that really bogs them down is they beat Charleston Southern by 2 when Charleston Southern was the bottom 20 team in the country. But that kind of, encapsulates South Carolina. And I was also on them to beat Texas A&M on the road. And that was a big hit for me last week. They're so defined in how they play. And if you can beat their particular style, if you can out execute them in the half court, then you are probably going to beat them. And if you are a team that likes to run, if you're a team that needs offensive rebounding, then you're not going to get those, and you have to change your play style. And that's why the Texas A&M game, I think, to me, was a perfect spot. I wanted to try to keep this mid-major focus just because we decided we're going to do that. And I picked a whole team. Tarleton State would be my guys. They are just it's almost like a set it and forget it at this point. They've been on a dominant tear. I think it's 11 in a row they've won, 10 in a row. And it's just they are killing teams with their pressure, with their physicality, with their athleticism. I'm sure not many people have watched a ton of Tarleton State this year, but they're a really fun watch. And Billy Gillespie had to take a leave of absence early in the year, so that kind of got them off on a rocky start to begin the year. And from there, they've been on a tear. And I want to highlight one freshman, Traviar Jackson, who he's a bench player for Tarleton State. I'm telling you, he's the next guy. He's like a 6'10" wing guard, unbelievably athletic. Like he's going to take the mid-major leagues by storm in the next couple of years.
That's good. I mean, Tarleton, I know, big result against Grand Canyon. They got them the Grand Canyon, who is the jewel of the WAC from the tournament perspective. Grand Canyon smoked them. I think second half they pulled away at home, but then at home, and then Tarleton got them back. I believe it was 2 weeks ago in a close game.
I
But
was
they've
on
been
that.
no letdown either, though. Like, Tarleton is still trending up. They've won their last 3 since.
And covered all of them too.
Yeah. So, Matt, on the Tarleton, we'll see if it carries into conference play. Not my guy of the week. I mean, there's plenty, but Jalen House, New Mexico, especially the last 2 years, team that they're an exciting team to watch. So I think I've internally kind of like been gravitating towards them. Not that I've been banning them so much, but in certain spots, I have thought that New Mexico has turned a corner and they were better this year. But San Diego State game a few weeks ago, out of control, too many turnovers late. They end up losing that one and not covering an inflated spread. Saturday against Boise, I don't think they really ever were up to the task of covering that one, but I don't know. I just feel like it's time for Donovan Dent to really take the reins as the primary ball handler and creator on that New Mexico team. And Jalen House feels the need to push the temp. I guess that's the style of play, but pushing that too far, he's falling all over the floor. He moves too fast for his own good. So New Mexico, I think, quickly playing themselves out of the tournament with a few of these results. They're going to probably need to win a handful in Vegas in the Mountain West tournament to really solidify their spot. But I'm a little concerned about New Mexico and Jalen House. Not my guy. I think might be playing this team out of the tournament.
I mean, when I watch New Mexico play, I sort of notice a pattern, which is when things are going well, when they're at home, when they're up, when they seem to be taking advantage of their matchup, they seem unstoppable. Like when they're in transition, when they're getting steals, when they're hitting shots, when they're feeling confident, there's probably not 25 teams in the country that can beat them. But if their shot's not falling, if they fall behind, then they start to come back and they press, and Jalen House takes too many threes because he's not a good shooter, and then they can't come back because they're not a type of team that can keep their composure and try to come back. And I think especially when you're looking at this time of year, when games are going to be tight, what happens when you sort of get knocked in the mouth? And New Mexico has shown time again that they don't have that resolve. Not my guy would be a result that happened last night that has been sitting with me, which is Florida Gulf Coast. I picked them as a long shot to win the ASUN tournament, and I picked them to win last night against Queens. And for the second year in a row, Pat Chambers, not my guy is Pat Chambers, specific. 2 straight years, his team has probably been the most talented roster in the conference of the Atlantic Sun. And both years, they've been relegated to the first game, which is for like the 7, 8, 9, 10 seeds, which should not even be happening with this squad. And then they've lost to Queens in the first round both times. And this roster is way too good to struggle this badly. And they in the second half last night, they looked lost. So I think Pat Chambers has to go. It's kind of like Rick Stansbury in Western Kentucky, where they got all of these talented players. And it's like, okay, you're the most talented team in your conference. What are you going to do about it? And then consistently do nothing. So you got to move on, new regime, find something else. It's not working.
Yeah, I saw Florida Gulf Coast getting a lot of love. And I mean, it made sense. They were, I believe, from like February on, they were actually, through Bart Torvik, the #1 team in adjusted efficiency. Or they were much higher, obviously, than their seed, given like injuries early in the year, and then they fall right on their face in the first game. And such as there it goes. But yeah, so there's a little my guy, not my guy. Mid-major tournament. So we just mentioned the ASUN. That one got started on Monday. We're recording this on Tuesday. The Horizon League tournament is starting. Matt, I'll let you go first because I'm going to lean on you for your mid-major expertise. Is there any conference, and it could be a specific team, a tournament, is there one that you really feel like you have a feel for and that you feel like you have a lot to say about, or do you love them all equally?
I mean, there are leagues that have treated me well this year and leagues that have not treated me well. The Sun Belt has been very good to me this year. I feel like I have a good read on the Sun Belt, and the read on the Sun Belt is I just do not see how any team beats Appalachian State. I think they have a good draw. Granted, it's a draw with a lot of 3-point variant teams, which can get extremely hot one day and knock them out. But I think that Appalachian State has the perfect equation defensively for a mid-major league, especially one in the Sun Belt that does not have a ton of elite shooting teams, that is very predicated on athleticism and speed. They have probably not even arguably a top 3 rim defense in the entire country. They play a drop coverage, which funnels teams towards the rim. They have 3 of the best shot blockers in all of mid-majordom. I think they're probably top 5 in block percentage in the country, and they're not letting teams score at the rim. You're gonna have to hit mid-range jumpers to beat them. They're not gonna let you take threes, and they're not gonna let you score at the rim. And to me, in a conference tournament setting, that just makes it, a real challenge. You are going to need to get hot from 3 to beat them, and you're probably not going to take enough to do that. They beat Arkansas State by over 20, I think, on Friday, just a couple of days ago, and that's probably going to be their semifinal matchup. And then you look at the finals, and it's them versus James Madison, and there's the old adage, granted, of course, upsets can happen, but if it's them and James Madison, there's the old adage, you can't beat the same team 3 times. That's not true. You can absolutely beat the same team 3 times. And Appalachian State, I think is a good matchup for James Madison, who, as dynamic as they are defensively, they have a ton of athletes. They don't have a ton of shooting. They don't have a ton of perimeter skill. And I think that's really given them some issues against Appalachian State. And I think that if that comes down to that finals, James Madison in the betting market is actually the favorite to win the tournament. I think Appalachian State is the bet there.
Yeah. So tee you up a little bit more. I'm just looking at FanDuel right here, but James Madison plus 145 is the favorite. They are, of course, the 2 seed. App State's 2-1, Troy 7-1, Arkansas State 850, and then you start going a little bit further down. Louisiana 12-1, Southern Miss 35-1, and then the rest. I feel like we could kind of move on from there. I do think App State is an interesting one. I mean, you look at even non-conference play; they upset Auburn at home, so this is a team that 26th in adjusted defensive efficiency in terms of KenPom. In terms of the Sun Belt, they don't pressure the ball. Is that maybe a concern in this? Or is it more that you just don't see a team that can take advantage of them right now in this tournament? Forget we're talking bigger picture, but you just don't see a team that can really find answers. Is that just all it is?
Yeah, it's just matchups, right? I'm going to lean towards teams that are great at defending the rim and great at defending the 3, because that's basically what you need to do to win in modern college basketball. And if a team is going to beat you from the mid-range, then they're going to beat you from the mid-range. Yeah. But it's just Appalachian State's defense is they foul the second least of any team in the country, just behind Creighton. They have the number 8 2-point percentage defense, number 8 block percentage, which means they're guarding the rim. And then they allow the 48th fewest threes per shot attempt in the country. So you're not allowing free throws, you're not allowing threes, you're not allowing layups. If you're going to go play an isolation team that goes nuclear from the mid-range and that's how you lose, that's fine. But if you're talking about betting, I'm going to put my odds into a defense that's not going to allow teams to score efficient baskets in efficient areas, analytically sound points. And Appalachian State does that better than nearly any team in the country, let alone the Sun Belt.
Yeah, I would also say something about James Madison and why, while I was going through Sun Belt odds and everything in App State, I thought it was interesting that the number 1 seed was being rated less than James Madison, because I didn't see either team with a definitive path advantage. I was a little intrigued about that. But also, another thing about James Madison, 3-point defense. They've allowed teams to shoot 28% from 3 the entire year. I just find that, is that going to hold up? That's just one game where things could go off the rails. I know they're 28-3. They've had a special season and all that, but I don't know. I do think App State, with the way they protect the ball, the way they're not 3-point reliant to begin with, I think it is a good setup for them. Again, they have 2 wins over them already. That a very likely final, it results for an App State win. I do think it's pretty interesting that they are rated below.
That's very interesting you say that. So with James Madison, I said that the Sun Belt wasn't a great shooting league. That is correct. They have not played a top 100 3-point offense in terms of percentage since game 4 of the season. They haven't played a single team in the top 100 since. And funny enough, their first 4 games were all against top 60 3-point offenses. Radford, they shot 37%. Howard, they shot 39%. Kent State shot 39% as well. And then the game one of the season was that Michigan State game where infamously Michigan State went 1 of 20 from three and still needed overtime where they fell to James Madison. So in the 4 games that James Madison's actually played competent 3-point shooting teams, they've gotten burned in 3 of them. No one can shoot in the Sun Belt, which is also why App State is the right pick, because no one can shoot in the Sun Belt and they defend the rim better than anyone.
And I mean, App State, they're not a 3-point reliant team, but if there's any constant, like they're like a gnat, like they're not like an eyesore. The KenPom isn't red on App State's 3-point shooting, so it's not like they're like a disaster from 3. So I know, again, they don't take many, but if it did come down to that, like maybe they could get hot from the perimeter for a 1-game sample, like a championship game. But usually when something like 3-point shooting is like 28%, like it's gonna come some way or another. It's gonna come for you, whether it's, you know, in the middle of February or it's in March. You can't run that good on 3-point defense. Even if you're the best defense in the world, it doesn't matter. You're gonna eventually have one of those poor shooting games. But Matt, I want to talk like almost the opposite of the Sun Belt, the CAA, because you have a handful of teams that are just all gas, no breaks on the offense side of the ball. Last year's champ Charleston, they are, I would say, peaking right now, just the way that their offense has been cooking over the last month. Another contender in there, UNC Wilmington. Hofstra is also coming on very strong. I would say like those 3 really stand out. Drexel's also had a very good year. Delaware, a little iffy there. Looking at this conference, is it Charleston has finally found their form and they're looking like another tournament team, or is there another team maybe hiding in like that middle tier that could potentially pop in the Colonial Tournament, which starts, I need to pull up this link, but it starts, I believe, on Friday.
On Friday, yeah.
Yes.
For a long time I thought that Charleston was super vulnerable, but then you look at their CAA schedule. I mean, they won the league by 2 games, and they didn't lose to any, quote unquote bad teams. And in the CAA, there are a lot of bad teams, and they won all of them. And the interesting thing about that in particular is Charleston is so 3-point variant. Like they shoot so many threes. 47.6% of their attempts are from 3. If they have an off shooting game, you'd think, okay, well, they could lose to anybody. That's the adage. Oh, a team that shoots 73s, they could lose to anybody. But they didn't. They beat all of the teams they needed to beat. They won almost all of their games against the top of the league. They got swept by UNC Wilmington, and then one loss to Towson, and then destroyed them on the road later in the year. So I think that seeing them be able to survive cold shooting nights and still come away victorious, finding other ways to succeed. Their defense had gotten much better throughout the year, slowly but surely. They have freshmen that are coming on. They have new players that are coming on. And then I guess the other point would be, I just don't really like a lot of the rest of the CAA. I think there's a lot of flawed teams. UNC Wilmington would probably be my second best bet, but Hofstra is pretty one-dimensional to me. Drexel, I think I just haven't been high on their offense all year. And then Towson is super young, and they can go through major, major cold stretches too. So I think my bet would probably be Charleston there.
Yeah, Hofstra was the team that popped to me as this team could potentially run through the conference tournament. They have since moved because it opened where it was Charleston, Wilmington, and then a gap. Now Hofstra and Wilmington have similar odds. So I imagine people are at least seeing the path that I'm seeing for the Pride. They did just lose to Charleston on the road by 11. But I think there's going to be a lot of, it's similar to what we were just talking about. You can't beat a team 3 times. Wilmington did beat Charleston twice this year after losing in the CAA championship game last year, UNC Wilmington. Not sure I like Wilmington's chance. I've kind of soured on them as the year has come to a close. They've lost 3 of their last 5. That includes a game at home to Elon. They lost that crazy game to Campbell. It feels like the offense is good, but I wouldn't say it excels at anything. And like if it becomes a shootout against Charleston on a neutral floor, I'll take Charleston and like I'll be like okay with that. Whereas Hofstra, that's a team that could potentially, get cooking from 3. They shoot a lot more threes. They're much more potent and explosive. They led the CAA in effective field goal percentage. So I'm not saying like Charleston's going to get bounced like super early by a random team at the bottom, but if this bracket breaks some way and maybe it's not the top two teams, it's probably because I think Hofstra has maybe caught like a heater. This is a veteran team as well, 18th in experience. So Speedy Claxton's team might be up to the task of making a quick work this weekend. So Hofstra, you think more of like not a winner, maybe make the finals?
Yeah, I think that you hit the nail on the head about UNC Wilmington, which is what are they really good at? I guess free throw shooting. They attempt and make a lot of free throws. That's cool and all, but that's not enough for me to really buy into you upsetting Charleston and winning where you couldn't win the first two times. Versus Hofstra does do something really well, is they are great 3-point shooters, and they have one of the best facilitators in the mid-major game in Jake Juan Carlos. And although I just, hammer on about Charleston's, 3-point variance, how many they take, but their ability to win, games that they should and always coming through when they've gone cold. Hofstra is not the same thing. They've lost to Campbell, they've lost to Northeastern, they lost to Monmouth, and those aren't complete pushovers. But there are games if they go cold early in the year. They lost to George Washington, where they shot 7 of 27 from 3. If they have an off shooting game, they're going to struggle. Almost all of their losses have come when they have not hit shots. And then the one that we're not talking about is beating Hampton, probably the worst team in the league, by 3 or by 4 because they made 5 threes. So while I've seen from Charleston the ability to win games when the shot's not falling, I have not seen that from Hofstra. They're not dynamic enough defensively for me. They don't have enough paint scorers. I think that one bad shooting game will knock them out.
Yeah. So I'm not saying necessarily betting Charleston to win. Again, the odds are Charleston 2-1, Hofstra 360, Wilmington 360, Drexel 450. Are you laying that price for Charleston, or this is one where it's like, yeah, Charleston probably just wins, but like I'm not super interested in playing this, maybe just like a game to game type thing?
Yeah, I'm not huge on betting favorites to win conference tournaments just because I don't really think the value is there. Like, if you really
Agreed.
do like Charleston, I think probably if you rolled over the money line game in, game out, you'd probably make more money that way at 2-1. I just, especially like in Ken Palm, they're only 10 spots ahead of UNC Wilmington. They're only 20 spots ahead of Drexel, 16 spots ahead of Hofstra. Like, there's going to be, if you rolled over the money line, you think they're going to win, you'd probably make more money that way.
Or even game to game. Like there could be like a spot. I mean. You just like if they play
or spot, yeah.
Like if they play Wilmington in the semis, you just like them there. They're going to be a reasonable price. You can just bet them in that game, and you're good.
Right. Exactly. So, and I don't like any of the middling teams in the CA. Like Delaware, I guess, has the ability to go on a run, but they're probably the most average team in the entire country. Like, I bet you, talking about Ken Palm green versus red, I don't think they're green or red in anything. It's the most insane thing. And then the bottom of the league stinks. So This is a league that I'm not going to make a bet in.
Word. One of the more interesting, usually year over year, you usually get a few banger games down the stretch. Missouri Valley Conference, obviously dominated by Indiana State. This one starts on Thursday, the 7th. It runs through the weekend. Indiana State, the way they're spoken about, you'd think that this team is a runaway favorite to win the tournament. They're only plus 155. Of course, they're the 1 seed. Drake 220, Bradley 360. Then you got to drop off with Southern Illinois, Northern Iowa 14-1, and Belmont 19-1. Matt, if you want me to go back, I can mention another team, but Indiana State, there were murmurs of a 2-bid MVC this year that quickly ran out of gas when Indiana State, the second they got ranked, they lost to
Illinois State.
Yeah, Illinois State. Someone lost to Evansville also. But so Indiana State, they are playing for their tournament lives here. Are they going to make it so everyone could have their social media accounts talk about Avila or
Robbie Avila? It's insane.
Yeah.
If we're talking about not my guy, I've bet on Indiana State once in the Missouri Valley Conference this year just because they've been huge favorites every game and I haven't wanted to lay it. And the one time I laid it was the first game they were ranked. like it was like a day or two later, and it was in front of their home crowd, and it was like this culmination of all they've done in the Josh Schertz era the last 2 years. And it was Illinois State missing 2 starters and their starting point guard, and I was like, this is a huge spot. They're gonna like show up for their fans, and then they lost outright by 13. I think they were 15-point favorites.
Okay, really
And
quick sidebar.
yeah,
If I'm gonna lay a huge like favorite, like with the points, I'd rather them lose outright than like win by like close to like not if you're gonna like not cover, just like embarrass yourself, like be like all the way wrong. I don't want to be like, oh well, like if they would have made a free throw here or there, like no, I want you to lose outright.
yeah. I even still watched like the beginning of the second half. I think Illinois State was up 6 at halftime. I was like, they can go on a run here. They're a great offensive team, but they are also relative. They're great, but they're relatively one-dimensional. Like if you can, Indiana State plays a similar defense to Purdue in the sense that they're going to try to avoid isolating Robbie Avila as much as possible because he's slow. Like Zach Edey is slow. He's not as big, but it's the same concept. And if you can have Illinois State's Johnny Kissinger, like this freshman who was getting time, and he ended up going on a tear after that game. He just took he got a ton of open space because Indiana State tries to avoid switches with Avila, and he just took advantage of his opportunities. I mean, I know that Indiana State handled Drake, at least in the second game at home. They won by 8, lost by 11 in the first game. If that ends up being the finals, just Drake is just a much more well-balanced team. They are a little fresh. They are a little dependent on a couple of freshmen, but they have the best player in Tucker DeVries. Yes, he's better than Avila, I have to say. They have Darnell Brody, who's been there before. They have some defensive guards, and they have, I think, pretty easily the best coach. Josh Schertz, he's been a great coach, Josh Schertz at Indiana State. I think that DeVries, the older DeVries, Darian DeVries, is the best coach in the Missouri Valley. And I do think Drake ends up pulling out this tournament. And then the other team that really could compete is Bradley. And they've been pretty bad the last month or so. Yeah. They can't beat Drake. I'm going to pull up Bradley's numbers real quick, but they've lost 4 times since the start of February, including, like you said, to Evansville and twice to Drake.
Yeah. Drake is the team that stands out to me, basically for what you said, just the balance. Indiana State, I would say Indiana State pretty clearly, like the best unit is their offense in the conference. But I don't know. I think if it became a 1-game scenario, Drake versus Indiana State, which would be the potential final, they aren't on the same side of the bracket. That's 1 and 2. So I do kind of lean towards Drake potentially. Drake also, they're in Bradley's side of the bracket. And like you mentioned, they've kind of had Bradley's number this entire year. Bradley also kind of running out of steam, it feels like, towards the end of the year. It felt like in the middle of January, early February, like that was kind of like they were the hot team in the MVC, whereas like down the stretch of the year, they lose to Northern Iowa by double digits. They couldn't really score in Illinois State. Then they lose kind of comprehensively to Drake in the season finale. I just don't know if I don't know if Bradley and momentum's like a narrative-y thing, but it just doesn't feel like Bradley's been in form. Whereas Drake, I think, has been just kind of steady all year. Indiana State obviously has the high ceiling. Team I want to ask you about in this one, just looking down the board, Belmont, they play, I would say, maybe the most unique style. Get up plenty of threes. They play at the fastest tempo in the conference. They shoot the crap out of the ball, as Belmont typically does. They've done a good job of beating up on lesser opponents. And then they draw. So they're the 5 seed. So they're going to get an extra game against Valpo, who Valpo is like an absolute train wreck. Then they get Northern Iowa, who they lost to earlier this year. Do you think, though, maybe winners of 7 of 8, can they maybe catch a little fire in the tournament? And then it's maybe they outshoot Indiana State, and all of a sudden you have a 19-1 shot in the finals.
Yeah, I can completely see it. And a lot of their losses in conference play came without Jacoby Gillespie. I think they've only lost twice since he's come back. Missouri State, the first game he came back, and that was when he came off of the bench, and then at Drake. So they were going to lose that game regardless of who they had on their roster. Yeah, I love Casey Alexander. I think he's a great coach. I love what he did at Lipscomb, and I love what he's done at Belmont. Offensively, they're top 3 unit in the Missouri Valley for my money, at least fully healthy. But just defensively, like They don't stink. They have Malik Dia, which is, with his size at least, gives you more length. And they can get hot. But also the problem with Belmont and getting hot and hitting shots is that's what the Missouri Valley Conference is all about. Every team, it seems, at the top of this league is elite offensively, at least in scoring the basketball efficiently. So it's like, oh, well, Belmont, they can score the ball efficiently, but so can Indiana State. I mean, so can Indiana State better than nearly any team in the country. So can Drake. So Bradley's defensively been up and down, but they can score super efficiently as well. So it's like Belmont can do things well, but I don't think they can do anything better than what the top teams can do, if that makes any sense. It's like if
No,
Belmont was an
100%.
elite pressure team, oh, well, their pressure could really cause issues for the top teams with their efficiency, but they just do what the other teams do really well, slightly less well.
Yeah. I would say the reason why when I was looking like, okay, I gotta like find maybe like a dark horse I could talk about or something, Belmont jumped out to me because of the fact that they play at the fastest, they shoot at a high clip from three, and quick turnarounds. Like all you need is like a little bit of a spark, and all of a sudden the threes just start falling. And I don't know, I'm selling the Indiana State hype. Like obviously they're very good, but like I'm like not there like with them being a tournament team, like a team that could be a fixture in the tournament. Like they are probably a team I'm like kind of interested in fading once the bracket comes out. Obviously matchup dependent, but like that's like my signals up. Like if they get a team that could like kind of lock down on defense, probably slow the game down. Like I feel like Indiana State's kind of going to get bounced pretty routinely, despite being like a trendy pick.
I would also bet the over in that game because they can't defend at all. Against great teams, at least they can't defend at all. They allowed, what do they allow? To Alabama, 1.38 points per possession. To Michigan State, who's had a ton of offensive issues, 1.23 points per possession. And then on the road at Drake, 1.25. They can't defend. But their offense is pretty unique. I can see a world in which if they make the tournament, they play like a middling, high major team that just has a major physicality advantage. But I don't think they can defend Indiana State. That they can probably catch them off guard, especially in the first half.
Yeah.
But defensively, yeah, they're going to get torched if they make the tournament and play a team with the size and athleticism.
Yeah, for sure. Another conference I think has been one of the more fascinating to watch in the mid-major ranks. The SoCon, Samford, your favorite. I mean, like awesome season out of them. I think everyone's kind of pining for them to get in because I think people like them as a potential upset Cinderella-like team. After them is UNC Greensboro. They're plus 450. Furman is 5-1. Western Carolina 550. Chattanooga 6-1. Is this Matt Samford everybody else, or can Samford's frenetic tempo maybe get caught off guard here a little bit earlier than expected?
I think that they're probably going to at least make the finals. They, you know, I don't love their style for a conference tournament. I mean, especially the SoCon, they play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Of course, Samford's not going to play on the Friday because they advanced. But that's still 3 games in 3 days to win this tournament. And Samford plays at the 10th fastest pace in the country. Their offense is the 6th fastest offense in the country. They run and they run and they run. And the problem is you can easily get they play a million guys, but you can easily get tired in this situation. They lost. They didn't even have to worry about 3 games in 3 days last year. They lost in the first round to Chattanooga. And then I'm looking at the team right below them in the standings, and that's UNC Greensboro. And I mean, we say guards win in March. We say experience wins in March. So what happens when a team has 2 fifth-year senior guards in their starting backcourt who also happen to be twin brothers? I think that the experience of Mike Jones as a head coach, the experience of the Langley brothers, Mikhail Brown-Jones, if you haven't seen him this year, has really reinvented his game to be one of probably the 10 best inside scoring big men in the country, and he's shooting 47% from 3 on limited attempts. They're not deep, but they play slow. They can control the pace. Although they lost to Samford twice, they played to 70 possessions both games, which is well below Samford's average. So that shows me that they can at least slow the game down. They're 7th in the country in 3-point percentage, and they take a ton. They are elite shooters. Yeah. So slow team, elite shooters can affect the style of the number 1 overall seed, experienced veteran guards that have been there before. That just seems like probably the best equation of any non-favorite in any conference tournament that I'm seeing this week.
Yeah, I think styles make fights. And UNC Greensboro, this is a team that plays at the second slowest tempo in SoCon play, 320th in the entire country. I'm going to try and pull up as we're talking like the transition defense. But if you can make Samford play in the half court, all of a sudden it's a different ball game. And you bringing up the possession. I know they lost both, but again, you're taking a team that's 450.
Yeah.
I think that
transition defense per synergy, 82nd percentile in defending it.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of a sudden, if you make them play in the half court, this is a pretty shaky group. And then one other thing, UNC Greensboro runs the most pick and roll offense in the entire country. It's a heavy ball screen offense. Samford, 250th defending that. That's a corner shot quality. So, can UNC Greensboro, again, they lost both. They were competitive games. They ended up losing both by 9. But I think that style is what you're looking if you want to slow down Samford, is you want to make them play in the half court. You want to slow this game down. You want to put some pressure on those guards. And Greensboro has the guard advantage.
No, for sure.
Greensboro was the team I had written down as well. As I like them. Western Carolina was a team I liked earlier in the year. And I've just kind of soured on them. I don't know if I think they are just a worse version than either Greensboro or Samford. I just don't know if they have the talent to withstand. I'm drawing a blank on his name. The
Vontario on Western Carolina.
Yeah.
Vontarius Wilbright.
Yeah. Wilbright. I just don't know. Maybe he could catch fire for a weekend, but I'm not sold on Western Carolina as making a run. I thought earlier in the year, closer to January, I was like, maybe this is the team that could be better than Samford and maybe outpace them, but I've soured on them. Greensboro's been the team that's really emerged down the stretch of the season.
I'll tell you exactly why Western Carolina has really struggled and why they're not going to win this tournament is they don't have a 2-level score. You call it, in basketball, you call it a 3-level score, rim, mid-range, and 3, but I'm just going to even say 2 because Vontarius Wilbright's made 9 threes all year. Everyone loves him and because he gets a lot of rebounds and assists, and that's great. And he is very good, but he can't shoot. He's made 9 threes on the entire season. And then the other top 2 scorers, Trey Jackson and Russell Jones, are 5'8" and 6'1". They've taken both over 60 more 3-pointers than 2-pointers. They're not scoring at the basket. And then you got a bunch of the rest of your team is big men and guys that play defense. They don't have someone say, get us a basket, all 3 levels, basket, 3. There's no one on that team that's doing that. And so they get stagnant offensively if they're not hitting deep shots. And I'm not going to pick them to advance either.
Yeah, 100%. Really quick, I have the WCC written down. We don't have to have a huge conversation about, but Gonzaga, St. Mary's, do you have a thought? I think Gonzaga is a team that is starting to look like they might be primed for a run. I could see it, but I'm pushing back a little bit because they just shot about 40% from 3 for a month, and that tends to make you look a lot better when you don't miss from 3. They also just absolutely dump truck St. Mary's on the road in what was a meaningless game for the Gales. It doesn't have to even be about the conference tournament because those two are going to meet, and there's just, if you have an opinion there, but those 2 teams in general, they're probably 2 of the more high-profile teams playing. Any thoughts on Gonzaga and St. Mary's?
Yeah, St. Mary's is completely screwed without Joshua Jefferson.
I agree.
I was huge on Gonzaga the other day because when they beat Gonzaga at Gonzaga, first of all, just by 2, Joshua Jefferson was the Ken Pom MVP of that game. He had 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 6 of 7 to 14 shooting. And I was in Vegas at the beginning of the year when St. Mary's was playing in the Continental Tire Tournament. They got swept in that tournament by San Diego State and Xavier. And then they lost again to Utah, and they lost again to Boise State. And everyone's like, what's wrong with St. Mary's? They stink, blah, 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 blah. And then they even lost a game at home to Missouri State. They lost at home to Weber State. And then they went on a crazy tear in the WCC where no offense is remotely close to being able to score on their unbelievably well-principled Randy Bennett defense, which has created a web of other teams playing drop coverage throughout the country. He's one of the 5 best defensive coaches in college basketball. And then they beat Gonzaga exactly because of that. They had just enough offense to sort of complement the defense. And without Joshua Jefferson, they just don't. The Aiden Mahaney is, pretty hit or miss, although everyone kind of deemed him the next superstar this year. Not the case. And they're not going to be able to score enough, I don't think, to beat Gonzaga. Gonzaga, like you said, could be flawed, but they're definitely in a better place than St. Mary's right now.
Yeah, I had St. Mary's in the first meeting at Gonzaga, and then I had Gonzaga in the second meeting against St. Mary's. Jefferson was
same.
I was thinking, I was like, I kind of think like St. Mary's might have like the antidote to slow down Gonzaga, and then going through it as I was prepping for, I was like, yeah, if Jefferson's not going to play though, like probably like he's kind of like the wing rangy defender that could really make things happen for St. Mary's offense, and then ended up taking Gonzaga, and that worked out really nicely. But I agree with you. I've been like kicking around the idea of like maybe a Gonzaga like Final Four future. I don't know if I'm there because I'm trying to stay rooted in what I saw earlier in the year. And that's a team that can't really shoot that well. And then like watching it now, it's like, okay, are they now just catching fire? And like it was good shooters shooting poorly, or is it poor shooters now shooting well? And I got to try and kind of wrestle with that type of analysis when you want to make a run, because I think a lot of their surge up the rankings has been just really good shooting. And I guess Graham Ike has really found his form, but again, it's against shitty competition.
Yeah, when Graham Ike, I mean, look, Graham Ike went off against Mitchell Saxon, and that's one of the better, post defenders he's played all year. But also, it's worth considering that's what St. Mary's offense lets you do. They're going to let you post up one-on-one against their guy, and Graham Ike has great post touch, and he succeeded in that matchup. Even though they've shot the ball really well in WCC play, they still only have one three-point shooter who's made more than 30 threes this season. And that's Nolan Hickman, and he's hitting them at 41%, and he's been drilling threes, and he's been great offensively, but he completely shrunk in the tournament last year. And if he plays better, they may have advanced way further. He was quite bad. And then, it's kind of, I mean, obviously they're much better than Western Carolina, but it's the same concept. Who's their three-level scorer? Ben Gregg is playing well, but I'm not going to call him a dynamic offensive player. He's good, but he's not dynamic. Nolan Hickman, like we said, is very hit or miss. Ryan Emhart is a great floor general, but he's not, put my head down, get 25 points guy. And then Graham Ike is posted up. So it can work, but I think over the long term, as they're playing better defensive teams, like that, they did beat Kentucky at Rupp, but that's when Kentucky's defense was trash. I do think they're primed for an earlier than perhaps you'd expect upset, but then again, everyone kind of thinks Gonzaga is going to get upset early every year anyways.
Yeah. So I have one more written down, and if you have any more, we can discuss. But usually the most chaotic, I would say, is the Horizon. Usually you see some random teams end up making a run. They end up in the finals. It starts tonight, Tuesday, so I don't think there's going to be any upsets tonight. It does seem pretty straightforward, these games. I'm pretty sure all of them are double-digit spreads or well over. There's no like coin flip game, so we could still, I think, talk about who we think is a contender, and nothing hopefully will change. But yeah, Matt, anything sticking out in the Horizon tournament? There are home games, then they go to neutral sites. This is like the longest spanning tournament on the college basketball slate over the next week. Your favorite is Youngstown State at 2-1, Wright State's 270, Oakland 300, and then you see a drop off, which I don't know if there should be that big of a drop off, but Green Bay's 950, Purdue Fort Wayne 14-1, Northern Kentucky 16-1, Milwaukee's 25-1, Cleveland State's 30-1, and then I'll stop there before I get to triple digits.
Yeah, I mean, those are going to be like IUPUI and Detroit. We're going to lose by 25 tonight.
Yeah.
I think if you know anything about college basketball, which clearly you do because you mentioned it, if there's one league that you should at least feel somewhat comfortable betting a team that's playing on the first day, it's going to be the Horizon League. Because of the gaps in between the days, it's not like, oh, you have to win 4 games in 4 days. You have to win a couple of road games, but you get breaks in between. You have time to scout your opponent in between. And this league is really bogged down by IUPUI and Detroit Mercy being absolutely horrible at basketball. The rest of the league is really good, and they're all really close. I think if you also take out Robert Morris, who's number 307 in KenPom, everybody is within 109 spots in KenPom's rankings. So everything is super duper close. I think if you're gonna, I personally put some coin in Cleveland State just because they have a ton of seniors. They're very experienced. Tristan Enaruna is probably the best player pound for pound in the conference, but it doesn't have a ton of star power. They have a veteran point guard who doesn't turn the ball over and can hit threes in Drew Louder, and they've also fared well against some of the top teams in the league. They beat Oakland, they beat Northern Kentucky, they beat Youngstown State. So this is a team that I think can go on a run, but a team that I didn't bet because I didn't like the odds. You mentioned them way too high for a team that is going to be playing on day one, and that's Purdue Fort Wayne.
That's my team. That's the team I have written down.
I mean, they lost to IUPUI outright, and I just talked about how awful they are. They do have some head scratching losses, but I talked earlier in the podcast about teams that do things very well, and Purdue Fort Wayne does two things really, really well: is they're snipers from three, and they have elite pressure, especially in a Horizon League that doesn't really have a lot of pressure teams. They're tiny and they can't rebound, and that might do them in a game against a big squad. But if they get hot from three, if they force turnovers, there's not a team in the Horizon that they can't beat. I just wish the odds were better.
Yeah, Purdue Fort Wayne was the team where I was like, I could see them wreaking havoc. Their ball pressure. They also, what helps me is I like to look at away from home ratings from Haslametrics. Purdue Fort Wayne ranks 51st in that. So you don't see a real drop off in their play when they go away from home, which is what's going to be going on in this tournament because they do play on the first day. And the other issue is they likely are going to play Youngstown. I'm pretty sure, almost certainly, if I could pull up the bracket, because the Horizon League, it reseeds after every round. So you're gonna so I believe Purdue Fort Wayne is going to be stuck playing Youngstown, which again, the gap isn't super great between all these teams, but I do think Purdue Fort Wayne might have the answer, especially given their form as well. If you go back through Bart, if you look at, if I can pull it up, but from February 1st on, Purdue Fort Wayne, they're 139th in KenPom. I'm not saying that's like a seismic jump, but it puts them much closer, and it's playing up above their season-long average. So the team is playing better than its season-long metric. So maybe they're playing up, and maybe it's just one upset and you're there. Going through the Horizon, I mentioned how chaotic it gets. Dating back to 2014, there have been 2 1 seeds that have ever won the tournament. So that's past 10 years, or past 10 tournaments, I should say. 2 1 seeds have won. Handful of 2s, a few 4s, and a 5 seed have won this tournament. So you don't have to be so I think seeding is a bit of a myth in the Horizon League tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the one big thing is just going to be that the quarterfinal round is at a neutral site, which means that the home court advantage can matter a fair bit. And that's really the only thing that I need to consider in my head when I'm doing these games, just because it's easy to think neutral site, and these ones are at home. Youngstown State, who you mentioned, they were even better last year. They had Dwayne Cohill, one of the best mid-major players in the country, and they lost, I believe, on their home floor. Or no, that was on they got upset by Northern Kentucky.
Yes.
And I remember this one pretty distinctly just because it seemed like Youngstown State was running through this league. They were 15-5 in the conference. They had the best player. They were slated for March, and Northern Kentucky had sort of, was not, really playing its best basketball going to the tournament, and it wasn't necessarily close. It was a double-digit game. The number 1 seed's not winning this tournament. I'm sorry to Oakland, but it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, Oakland's not even rated the highest.
Yeah.
Not rated the highest. They don't have the best odds. It's very funny how the Horizon League, it's like a guaranteed chaotic thing. So yeah, good stuff there in the Horizon League. Is there any other mid-major tournaments that I may have missed? I think we got most of them, but if there's any other ones, Matt, that you feel strongly about, you want to talk about, feel free. This is open. We'll have open season here.
I'll give you one. The Big South, I think, is having a banner year. There are a lot of really good teams in this conference, to the point where Radford, who I think was 2nd or 3rd in the preseason poll, is the 9th seed, which is the final team that made it to this tournament. That is unbelievable how deep the Big South, as we talked about, some teams like some leagues like the Horizon and the CAA, where the bottom is horrific, that is just completely non-existent in the Big South. They've been just cannibalizing and beating up on each other all year. Everyone loves High Point. They're a really fun team to watch. They shoot a ton of free throws. They make a ton of threes. They have a Mississippi State transfer, Kimani Hamilton, who's just been on an absolute tear over the last month or so. But I don't think they're going to win the Big South tournament, and that's because I don't love their half-court shot making. They get a ton of offensive rebounds, and they're pretty good in transition. They get to the line, but to me, that style, when games are super intense and close, is not the style I want for my team to back in the conference tournament. I'm going with number 3 seed Gardner-Webb. They have sort of been a team. Sorry, go ahead.
750 on FanDuel. Sorry for interrupting.
750 on FanDuel. They are that's probably the 3rd best odds or 4th best odds, and definitely behind High Point Nashville.
Yep.
And they're an interesting case. I've backed UNC Asheville against Gardner-Webb twice because Drew Pember, one of the stars of mid-majordom, is huge, and Gardner-Webb is tiny, and they don't really have a big man. They're 355th in average height, and I'm like, well, just Drew Pember is going to kill these guys. But the resolve on this team is absolutely unbelievable. They have a ton of guards who are super physical, super tough, and they're veteran players. DQ Nicholas leading the way there. And their shot making, when they're on, can be absolutely out of this world. They shot 92% from 3 in a game earlier this year. They shot over 40% 7 other times. Granted, they've also struggled and they've lost outright in some games they really should have won. At Presbyterian, at Queens.
They have a bad smoothing of their shooting. It's like very like up and down. Yeah. It's like they'll shoot 90% and then 10%. They don't have like a nice smoothing setup here with Gardner-Webb.
And then when they were finally featured on ESPNU a couple of days ago, they were up 69-56 against Longwood. And then they scored no points for the next 7 minutes, and then won because they were fouled on a 3 at the buzzer. So they can be really hit or miss. But I think that's the type of team that I want for a tournament like this. Super experienced, guard-driven shot makers, can get really hot. They've beaten Asheville twice, and that's the best team on their side of the bracket. So I think that they have the ability to beat them a 3rd time. And High Point has crushed them twice, and High Point will beat Gardner-Webb if they play in the finals. But I do think that the winner of the Winthrop-Longwood game in the other quarterfinal is going to beat High Point. I think High Point is primed for a letdown, and because of that, the trickle-down effect, I'm going Gardner-Webb for that one. And for the value on it, I think is one of my favorite bets of conference tournament season.
All right. Love it. Gardner-Webb. Love it.
Yeah.
So, Matt, and then Wednesday, this will be published. So are there any spots circled? I'm putting you on the spot because I didn't ask you for this, but while we're talking, Wednesday's college hoop slate, whether it is conference tournament, the mid-major ranks, you have one of the high major ones that you want to talk about. Again, this is dropping Wednesday morning. So if you want to give the listeners maybe a little sneak peek on the Wednesday slate, I mean, you honestly have some banger games. You have Marquette, UConn rematch, Iowa State, BYU, FAU, SMU, Seton Hall, Nova. I guess that's not as exciting, but plenty of high major games, obviously conference tournament games. Anything stick out to you? Openers aren't out yet as we're recording, but we can use KenPom projections if we want.
Yeah, let's do it. Looking at it right off of the bat, I think that what I'm seeing here is Iowa State probably around -5, -6 hosting BYU. BYU can't shoot on the road. They weren't hitting anything at Kansas and then got absolutely nuclear down the last couple of minutes of the game. I mean, they weren't hitting anything at home against TCU, and we all know how that game flipped like absolute mad. I was on TCU +6. That one really stung. But I don't like BYU on the road. Obviously, Iowa State is one of the best home teams in the entire country, and BYU going on the road against pressure would just be at UCF. And I like comparing UCF games when teams play them for Iowa State games, just because their defense is extremely similar. Amazing pressure, strong side help means a lot of cross-court passes, which is why they allow a ton of threes. And they scored 0.94 points per possession at UCF. and barely won that game, but they just won because UCF's offense stinks. Huge home spot for Iowa State. They have hit huge and huge home spots all year. They beat Houston at home. That's all you really need to say there. They don't have a home loss on the season, and BYU has lost, let's see, this 5 times on the road in Big 12 play. So if the line is around 5-ish, I'd probably be on Iowa State there if we're talking big games on the Wednesday slate.
Yeah, not as big, but I like Seton Hall to beat Nova. I think Nova, well, I tweeted out, but Nova, if you look at their splits over the last month, because now everyone's like, oh, well, here comes Villanova. They're going to, I think it's crazy they're going to make the tournament, but their February splits, they were 73rd in adjusted offensive efficiency, second on defense. They were allowing the third highest 3-point rate, and they were shooting the 18th most threes. Meanwhile, they were hitting 38% of their threes, and opponents were shooting sub 30%. So a ton of two-way splits here. I think Villanova is going to crash and fall here. I think Seton Hall, revenge spot also. Nova smoked them in the first game. Seton Hall's much, much better at home. Villanova needs the game, but Seton Hall really italicized bold font needs the game. So I think Seton Hall can get them. Nova 1, I think Seton Hall 1 is fine. Like Seton Hall within a bucket, I think is fine on Wednesday slate. Any other ones jump out?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of forgotten as a narrative what Seton Hall's home meant when they beat Marquette at home and they beat UConn at home in like a 2-week span. Everyone's like, "Oh, Seton Hall's home is unbelievable."
Creighton at home too. They lost in triple overtime.
Right. So they should have beaten Creighton at home. That's the game where I'll never forget. Kadari Richmond went 8 of 32 from the field.
Yep.
It's the most impossible thing to do ever. Take 32 shots and make 8. And then they also lost the next game against Providence at home, but Kadari Richmond didn't play. So their only 2 losses in conference play at home, triple overtime when their best player missed 24 shots, and by 4 without their best player. Yeah. So if that's a pick 'em, you got to take Seton Hall at home because that's where they win. They also need this game. And yeah, the variance for Villanova.
Yeah, and then any other that Big South tournament starts, OVC starts, NEC starts, any of those stick out, or are you all set?
I would say I don't hate SIU Edwardsville. They'll probably be about a 2-3 point favorite against Eastern Illinois. I picked SIU on the road against Eastern Illinois, and they had a very cold shooting game and lost that one. But SIU feels like a team that probably makes a run in the OVC tournament, and Eastern Illinois isn't very good. So if that's like a 1 possession game, I'd probably take SIU, but I can also see the market bet that one up a lot higher than Ken Palm, which 100%. Has it at 2.
Matt, appreciate, man. Where can we find your work?
At The Score. That would be www.thescore.com or on the Score app, which if you're a college basketball fan and want to look at scores on your phone, I'd say is a must have because they do a very good job updating them. Even the low major games are normally updated pretty much rapidly. And then you go to the news section, you can find my ramblings there, especially in March Madness. You're going to have a lot of content and analysis up there.
Awesome. Matt, really appreciate it. You can, of course, follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach, on the betstamp at RW33. Matt, I don't know if you're going to do your Google Docs, but if you don't, make sure you go check out his stuff at The Score. If Matt does post it, make sure you can find him on his Twitter at Matthew Winnick. He'll be posting those as well. Matt, thanks again for coming on, man. Best of luck this March. Make sure to stay sharp. Don't take the bait. And we got to do this again soon, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.